systems of support, and that makes them often very like isolating to move through as well. And then from there, we talked a little bit about just sort of the big issue of silence, and that we just don't talk about things within our community. And whether that's talking about things like community tragedies, personal mental health, or the collective responsibility we have to each other to make sure that we have proper support, that we have the information we need to take care of each other, just to like understand all of the ways that our communities are not homogenous. And then from there, we talked a little bit, coming back to this term stigma, and kind of how we use active versus passive voice to think about the ways that conversations about mental health are not happening within our community, and that even within like AAPI communities, and even when there is shared identity, there can still be stigma and difficulty when speaking with providers, because it brings up so many of the tensions and feelings we have around talking about things within our families, and sometimes feeling like you're talking to a parent when you might be talking to a provider who shares a similar identity, and some of the difficulties with that. And that sort of led us to a conversation on talking through parents and family, how sometimes like it's really hard for us to feel like our parents want to acknowledge things happening within their home and within their families in a way that it might be easier for them to talk about like a friend's child or someone else that they know rather than someone at home. And seeing this as really tied to intergenerational trauma and wanting our parents to be able to get the help that they need, but then not having competent resources that are able to understand the culture and language, or like take insurance that they might need, or be accessible in different ways. And also this idea of like reciprocal versus authoritative filial piety that came up a little bit at the end. And then finally, we talked about the shifts that lead to more of our community going to therapy, from accessibility to normalizing things within our culture here, and imagining third spaces where we can reclaim our identities and experiment to like understand ourselves within ourselves and each other a little bit more. Is that good? Okay, cool. That's it.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's go to the second group, clinical and EBP practices.
All right, so our group focused first on a question, which was also, what are some of the most pressing challenges facing AAAI communities? And we started by identifying, challenges with food insecurity, and one of our members mentioned that oftentimes, are you okay with it? I can stand wherever. I don't. Okay. Okay. Sorry. I just mentioned that oftentimes the foods that are discounted at grocery stores are not cultural foods, or foods that our communities are comfortable in cooking. So food insecurity, as well as just the general economy, is a major challenge for this community. And then we also spoke about just government funding, the political climate, and the access on funding and resources, which has led to silencing, fear, and really retreating from accessing existing resources. And then our group also spoke about challenges in terms of identity development as coming up in particular with transitional age youth, but just generally throughout the lifespan is something that the AAI community is grappling with. And a large part of that is lack of media representation that's accurate, and then also lack of seeing people in our community as being in positions of power or as our therapists, and that's something we're all actively addressing. And then we also talked about language barriers in translation being a challenge within providing resources, and just like the things that come up in the therapy in terms of having to call a translator and things that like act as barriers, and also just the lack of interpretation in various languages. And then we also spoke about the lack of mental health awareness prior to a crisis emerging within the community, and then when a crisis does happen, or when somebody reaches a certain level of mental health crises, then that's when they're reaching out. and then also not having the terminology to discuss what's happening. So we talked about how there's at time, or in a lot of ways, there's lack of preventative work. And then a lot of the work ends up being building trust and building awareness and defining what things are, and also using language that's non-stigmatizing and also is accessible, like talking about stress in terms of like somatic symptoms or being anxious, or is a lot less scary than using like diagnostic terms for many people. And then our second question was, what are the short-term and long-term solutions to this? So we talked about, of course, increasing accessibility and meeting patients where they're at in the community in terms of increasing media presence, going to various community events, and just increasing the accessibility to understanding what mental health services are and what mental health challenges might be. We talked about changing this perception of being a monolith through increasing providers that have these identities, but also remaining culturally humble and being very curious, and in doing so challenging our own preconceived notions that our patients are a monolith, but also sharing our stories and diversifying like other people's understanding of what our community is. And we also talked more about preventative services and the impact that has in building trust with the community. And then lastly, we also focused on what are additional partners and resources. So we continue to talk about community organizations, including legal, medical, housing, and other kind of community resources to meet patients where they're at prior to crises. We talked about school-based outreach within like all sorts of grade levels, and also working with student organizations. And for me, I was thinking about the college-aged population, and that supports normalization of accessing these resources. We talked about media, and then providing that information within a wide variety of languages. And then finally, we also just mentioned like parenting practices and starting to increase understanding and accessibility to mental health resources and information that way. Anything else from my group? Okay.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the women's mental health group.
All right, hello. Sorry, I unfortunately don't think I have very holistic notes since I focused too much on what I was drawn to during our conversation, but hopefully I can give a relatively comprehensive overview. We kind of started out with introductions and asking, so what was most interesting to you all today? What would you like to discuss more about? And so we got onto various topics, one of which was how do you take care of yourself, especially as a practitioner, as somebody who has such deep connections, even in research, right, to people who are experiencing profound suffering. And so we talked a lot about the different physical, spiritual, and mental dimensions of taking care of yourself, and how it's really important to prevent yourself from getting into a more difficult headspace. And we talked a lot about making sure to create time and space for yourself to vent and process in a safe space. I believe one of the biggest takeaways was also focusing a lot on the out breath as opposed to taking a deep breath, right? Since it helps us become more mindful and connected to our body, and really learning how to sit with discomfort, and how when you do experience these negative or more intense reactions, right, to the clients you're seeing, to the work you're doing, it also means that you're holding space for those people and authentically sitting with them in their discomfort, in their experiences, and how that can be a meaningful way to engage. And another thing we also touched on was how to talk about suicide, how to talk about people's pain, and especially how to talk about it with people who have religious views or spiritual views that view it as more of a taboo topic, right? And what we addressed was how sometimes we talk about pain as death. So we might say, I want to die, as a way to say, I'm in deep pain, right? And accessing different ways to form language around that is something that we discussed, as well as we also talked about how suicide sometimes is perceived as a sin, right? And a really valuable insight that we had come up was how when we say sin, right, it can mean separation from God, separation from goodness, right? And reframing that can also help open up conversations for different clients and for ourselves as practitioners, researchers. And thinking about how when we say we want to end our life, sometimes it more so means we want to end our suffering, right? And opening up the conversation to saying, if there was another way, what would you do about the situation? And emphasizing that suicidality is not necessarily what everything of what an individual is. It's more so just one part of a person, right? Somebody made an allegory or an analogy where they talked about having a plate, right? And in that plate, suicidality is just one part. You're just focusing on that one part of the plate. And I thought that was a lovely allegory, or analogy, sorry. But yeah, and we were talking about how you should be with the suicidality, but not necessarily inside it, right? Making it a little bit less ego-syntonic, more ego-dystonic. I thought that was lovely. And then also, we brought up another study that Dr. Hom was trying to get started on how we never really have focused on families that are in the AAPI community who have experienced suicide in their lives, right? And how she's really hoping to bring that to light with her new study. I believe it's a qualitative and quantitative mixed methods one, so I'm super excited to hear more about it in the future. And we also really talked about how to balance offering another perspective that tends to be more psychoeducational with acknowledging people's cultural, religious, spiritual, or personal beliefs. And yeah, I would say that's the basic gist of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all those ideas. Okay, and last but not least, the Workforce Development Sustainability Group.
Oh, do you want to stand a little farther from? I'm assuming it might. You can take my seat again.
Come closer.
All right.
Okay. Oh goodness. Okay. So we spoke about the most pressing challenges in our workforce. Stigma was the first thing that we circled back to, and we spoke specifically about the conversation about gender that happened earlier this morning. In terms of like men seeking mental health, women seeking mental health, and there was a particular discussion about there's a Chinese term that I forget that is like translates to little miss, and it's like like sort of like a. Do you want to shout out what it was? Thank you. And so like that got me thinking about like. This is a helping profession, a caring profession, and women or men, if they would prefer to go see a female therapist or a male therapist, and what that experience is like. And also we talked about other most pressing challenges, awareness and education, specifically for our parents. We spoke about sort of like being interested in the we and not just our experience, and like we want to get out the information and provide the resources and the the skills early on. But we had like someone speak about a peer group that they put out for parents, and only 3 signed up. And so we can't expand on the education and the knowledge if there's like not much to know if we don't know. So we're trying to we spoke about trying to get to ask for help early on because of the stigmatized ideas that like if you seek mental health therapy treatment, or if you're a parent seeking for a treatment, it's like, oh, I made a mistake, I did something wrong, or there's something wrong with my child, and it's not the case. It's just like, this is something that'll be helpful, and let's not wait until the dam breaks and the mental health crisis occurs and be proactive about it, and how difficult that is to do. And yeah, overall, a very high need in our community. a very high need in our community, based within the cultural context. Of course, language is important, the language barriers, but that there's just something missing about the cultural context within our workforce. So we spoke about renaming and reframing mental health, which isn't always received the most positively. It's sort of like this morning we were talking about social emotional learning in the schools, or there was like focusing about like healing the mind, healing the heart. I spoke about how in my neuropsychology class we're talking about brain disorders, and if it's more scientifically sounded, then maybe that will gain more authority and research in the world and maybe more funding. And let's see, so that would be helpful. Oh yeah, and then I'm sort of like running around, but short and long-term solutions, we spoke about that. And also increasing just like workshops, conferences, community engagement to teach our parents, our professionals, our young people who are like maybe wondering about the field to find out more about the field, so we can get them early on. Yes. Oh, and so that led us into our next conversation about addressing these workforce challenges. Like we all came to the field for a reason. There was something that brought us here, and so how do we like pull on that and get other people to come into our field, because we are undermanned and overworked and burnt out. And so we talked about how it is a big challenge to like most of this work is like a big life pause. We talked about like hitting the age of 30, and that it's a long time to spend in school, a lot of research, a lot of work to do to be in this field, and instead of like making like, the one person who knows it all and just like diversifying and divide and conquer sort of the skills, and having more people know a little bit of this, a little bit of that, to like man and spread out in the community. Because it's also not very accessible to learn this information all the time, or to get into the field and take time off. It's not very good in this country. And yeah, just like other like roles that are helpful, like life coaching and therapeutic mentors and things like that. Like doesn't all have to be on all of us. And the last note that I think was meaningful at the end was to honor all of our positions. I spoke personally how my mother only let me continue in this field because I was going to be a doctor. But let's not honor just the doctor. Let's honor like all of the people that do this work, because it is a helping field and we do a lot of good work. And just like we take kids to the fire station when they're little for a field trip, like let's like show them what it means to be like in the helping profession, and hopefully get more people in. So I think that's it.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's a lot, and all of these ideas are very, very inspiring. And again, I'm going to have to talk really fast. It's flashed with the 2-minute sign, but So first of all, I think you all did the assignment very well, because our conference title, if I may go back to that, is From Insight to Action, right? And you all did that by talking about your insights and then the possible actions that can go along with it, which is short-term solutions, long-term solutions. So if we were to have conference proceedings, which we're not going to have, don't worry, you don't have any writing papers, but sometimes from a conference you have conference proceedings. But if we were to have one, I want to challenge everybody to think about this. Like, okay, so this may be sort of a lofty notion, but think of a paradigm, right? And think about how this paradigm can shift. So the paradigm that everybody's reported back on, as far as I could put together. Okay, so we have silence, and we talked about stigma, right? And the meaning of silence in our cultures, and the meaning of stigma as well, right? Okay, and then you all talked about language, literal languages, like the many languages, but also the meaning of languages, how meaning can change according to culture and perception. And then, we talked about pain, and, how can we transform pain to growth and strength. And then finally, prevention. There's a lot of talk about prevention and media as one, overarching or macro way to prevent by what it's depicting. So if you take all of that in our current paradigm, and I challenge everybody to think about a paradigm shift of shifting this so that it's much more applicable and useful to us, whether we are researchers, clinicians, or management of social services, policy, right? Because all of the current paradigm doesn't work. I mean, we've already said that, we heard that today and how it's mismatched. But what our work is, whether we're writing or whether we're doing art or whether we are intervening with individuals, let's think about how to shift the paradigm so that it works better, okay? Because I think that we all share the same stories, the same backgrounds in a general way about the pain and the trauma, no matter who you are, right? We have gained that, so we know that so well. But I would like all of us to move forward from that in our work, and try to come up with a new paradigm of how it's going to work, not just in a piecemeal way, but in a systemic way. Okay, I think that's my 2 minutes. So thank you very much. I just want to thank everyone. I was so overwhelmed and moved by everything that you do, and I think that, especially to the first panel, when I was hearing you all, and it seems like, you were told that you were lesser than, but I heard everything that you do with your art and you're not lesser than, you're more than. I mean, what if it's because you're more than most people, right? You have more gifts, not lesser than. And I feel that way about everybody today, and I'm just so pleased to be part of this this whole day. So on behalf of myself and the Lotus Project, thank you all for coming and sharing.
Thank you, Dorothy, for that very succinct 2-minute webinar. It'll be focused on EMDR and using EMDR with specifically adapting it to Asian American and Asian immigrant populations. So that's coming up on September 18th if you want to scan and register. And the evaluation form, it'll be for throughout the day, the sessions, and also the breakout sessions. It would be great to get your feedback on how that went. And our socials are at the bottom. And then I'll pass the mic to Kristen for updates.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen, and I'm a research associate with the Lotus Project. And yeah, I just want to give a couple of updates on what we're doing at the Lotus Project in terms of developing community resources. And I think it ties in well with what we've talked about today at this workshop. And I think it also offers, future opportunities for connection between all of us and collaboration as well. The first resource that we've been working on is a guide for community-based organizations as well as mental health service providers on how to use and culturally adapt evidence-based practices for their Asian American and Asian immigrant communities and clients. And we interviewed mental health providers and community-based organization staff across California to create this guide and to really integrate all of their insights and all of our findings. And so right now we're still working and developing on this resource, but once it's finished, we'll definitely be disseminating it through our website and as well as through the Lotus Project Network. So please keep an eye out for that. And the next project that we're working on is we're developing a curriculum to, basically it's kind of like a training to help mental health service providers, understand and kind of apply more culturally responsive practices for their Asian American and Asian immigrant youth that they work with. And for this one, we've worked with Dr. Hannah Grossman from the National Center, the National Children Traumatic Stress Network. sorry. And it's based on their core curriculum on childhood trauma. And so Dr. Hannah Grossman has really helped us in sort of developing the curriculum and building it so that it's really applicable to providers, especially those that come from like a non-Asian background but want to help Asian youth. And it also integrates digital storytelling videos that Asian youth created that kind of go through their lived experiences and their narratives as well. And that was through the Ai 2 project, also from the Lotus project. So I think for that project, if you or your organization or anyone you know would be interested in participating in the training in the future, feel free to definitely reach out to us, and I'm sure we can like set something up and have future collaboration. So I just want to give a few updates on what we're doing as well.
Thank you, Kristen. Whoa, it got really loud all of a sudden. So the last part of today, we're going to do one more Mentimeter, and I'm also going to invite Angela Tang up. She is the CEO of Richmond Area Multi-Services. You've heard from her already, but she will come up to give a closing remark, and we'll start with the Mentimeter on just takeaways from the day. So.
Hi, everyone. So as Ellen said, she's going to pull up the Mentimeter. It'll be our last one for the day, our grand finale. So and the question is, what is our biggest takeaway from today? And Mentimeters, if there could be like a summarize in a couple of words or a phrase, that would be great. And then we can kind of it'll do its word cloud magic. And so if I could talk while you're doing that. So some of the takeaways that I feel like I've kind of seen throughout the day is really around, I loved how we first started with a panel of those with lived experience, and really centered and kind of framed the whole day. And then through the discussions of the day, I felt like I kind of went through my entire lifespan. So, early childhood, adolescent, and then we talked about the intersectionalities of our identities. And so some of those kind of takeaways that I think that are being called out are around connection and empowering. There's been rich experiences and ideas, the importance of community, and I think that is one of the centerpieces of what brings us here today. We all came here and brought us we came here for like a common interest, a common topic, and I think that's what brings us together, and that is also a sort of strength for us. We have a proud history. We have so many brilliant people working towards a shared goal. We're making time and space for storytelling, and listening is an intuitive healing practice that is getting lost in present lives of busyness. Intergenerational trauma and continuity is another theme. And then, okay, thanks. Oh, and there's more. There's generous spirits and resourceful and supportive community, change in decision-making that must include those with lived experiences, and the joy of sharing. Collaborative treatment and collaboration of knowledge and resources, and approaching preventative behavioral health will need to be done with an uncolonized lens and with collaborations with stakeholders within the local community, so it is more holistic and reinforced. And so I'm going to pause there, and there's more, but I think one of the things that Dr. Churu started off with was one of the main, I think, goals of having the in-person workshops. Lotus Project does webinars, but also does in-person workshops, is so that we can connect with each other. There's representation in this room from universities, there's students, there's community-based organizations, individual practitioners. So another kind of unofficial homework is if we've met someone already that we haven't normally wouldn't have met otherwise. And I think everyone can walk away having met someone before we leave the room, to exchange, because that is the power of collaboration and the power of our community. And and with that is a reflection of the Lotus Project. It's a collaboration with Public Health Institute, and today with RAMS and NEPIMA and Boston University, and funded by SAMHSA. So on behalf of Lotus, we just wanted to thank you for spending the day together, and hope we will all stay connected and make sure to connect with each other. Thank you.